If my husband walks in the room while I'm giving a webinar to thousands of people, which happened last week, suddenly I'm speaker, streamer, and wife all at once. Many of you have shared with me your versions of overlapping roles under lockdown. You're the child who worries about your parents. You're the parents worried about your children. Some of you are both. You're the partner of someone who is either now too close or too far away. You're the partner to a healthcare provider with whom you must negotiate risk and proximity. You're the sibling not letting your brother visit because he hasn't been careful enough. You're the parent now teaching your kids, suddenly needing to show that you're a math whiz, a music teacher, and an English major. You're navigating virtual conferences in which your colleagues can peek directly into your bedroom. And hear little kids yelling or the dogs barking, the evidence of all your roles. The mute button has become our last boundary. Maybe you're like me, realizing that at 61, you're considered at risk, even though you feel youthful and vibrant. Some of you also, like me, are therapists trying to help your patients cope with the same prolonged uncertainty, acute stress, and loss that you yourself are facing. And throughout all of this, you are also working, filing taxes, applying for loans, or unemployment. And right now, we're not just social distancing, we're distancing from the places we go and the things we do. The different parts of our identity are usually highly localized. They have a setting: home, commute, office, school, church, gym. Even those of us who normally work from home are used to going out. Without this differentiation of settings, it's hard to switch context, establish routines, and negotiate boundaries. But these challenges are having an interesting side effect. We're seeing the possibility for a new way of being. We're reprioritizing. We're communicating differently. We're reconnecting. We're slowing down. We're taking care. We're checking in. And I just thought that was a beautiful picture and a pretty honest picture of just exactly where we are right now in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, in the middle of social distancing, in the middle of everything that's going on. And so as she started her letter, I will actually share my screen here. And I'd love for us to also start maybe with a deep breath. So if you're up for it, just take a moment, take a deep breath in, exhale, feel your feet on the floor, and settle in a little bit. I was thinking about how just all of this feels like an accurate picture of my life right now. Trying to handle the kids, get in a little exercise, do some work, take care of the pets, keep connection with my wife, who's trying to keep connection to work, and everything else. And what I realized, and what I wanted to start with too, as we kind of hear the context that she just painted, is that, you know, a lot of us, we're in this kind of pressure cooker context right now. As she talked about the kitchen chair, I laughed because I was sitting in a kitchen chair that I had just been a teacher, tried to move to a work Zoom call, then worried about what was going to happen for dinner. And so we sit in the same chair and we have many different roles. And all these roles that we have in our life, they're all just overlaps mixing together where we are at home, many things happening at the same time. And then there's probably some of us on this call who actually wish we had more roles to play. You're sitting in the chair, but you wish you could get out of it and go somewhere, because most of the roles that you play require you to be in a different location, to be somewhere else. Maybe that's to be grandparent or to be someone who's out serving the community. And instead you're stuck in this chair, the same chair you've been in for the last 6 weeks. Physical distancing has given us, this loss of these transitions where we usually move from place to place. I know for me, when I leave in the morning, after kind of doing the morning routine with kids, getting them out to school on a normal day, I get in the car and I take a deep breath and I put on a podcast and I start to get ready to get into work brain. And then I'm in work brain, and then I'm coming home, and or I'm going, when I go to church or the gym, each of these places have their own kind of identity. And all of that is kind of we have a sense of loss around those things right now, as we're not able to really change our space. And yet, at the same time, there is some hope. I know I have lots of conversations with people right now about just the reflections they're having on their normal life and on life right now and things they're learning, and there's new possibilities. And so my hope that you're experiencing in this pressure cooker context, and that I'm hopefully experiencing in my own life, is that this really is a both and. While there is some incredibly challenging parts, maybe God's up to something in this time as well, if we'll lean in a little bit and see what else might be out there. So I wanted to tell kind of a story, because I think every context has its own distortions. And especially when we talk about anxiety and mental health things, depending on the context, will kind of potentially distort how you're feeling. So just the other day, I'm feeling incredibly frustrated. Well, why am I frustrated? Well, there could be a million different reasons. Could it be that I'm looking over from my same kitchen table chair that I was just working at, and then my kids keep interrupting because they need help with their math or their English, and I actually don't know what it's talking about, and that's kind of frustrating. Or I'm looking over and I'm seeing the dishes being done. Or I'm trying to get this presentation finished for you guys tonight, and my 4-year-old daughter, who just got a Princess Leia costume and who woke up today on May the 4th saying, "May the 4th be with you," wants to come in and she wants me to wear the Princess Leia costume. And so I'm trying to put together my slideshow, but instead I'm getting a Princess Leia wig put on my head. Well, I'm sitting here, feeling all this frustration, and I don't want to take it out on her, because every context has its own distortions. It's probably not about her. So I decided to lean in a little bit, and then we take this picture. And then she realizes that the computer can take pictures. So we take a few more pictures. And this was kind of the life. And so I think as we think about anxiety, and especially in this time, I really wanted to paint the picture of this moment as best I could. And I thought the letter from the therapist helped. Because each context will have its own distortions. And I think that's really important to remember. Tonight, I hope to kind of talk about anxiety in several different ways that will help us manage it now in this moment, also as we go forward. But I did want to also kind of put this context in front of us. And so I've got a little definition here that I'll share for the context that we're in. And I think this is a pretty good kind of definition of what this feels like right now. A season of prolonged uncertainty. We don't know exactly when all this is going to end. We don't know how things are going to play out. There's just a lot of uncertainty, and it's been here for a while. I was kind of getting hopeful that the summer months were going to be something that this, would take the virus away and things would open up and my kids might get to go to some summer camp. And I just read an article this afternoon, kind of saying that's really, summer is going to be one big experiment, whether this virus reacts to that way or not, because they react differently in the first year than they do later after they've come into contact with the human population. So just the moment you get some hope, it seems like maybe the rug's pulled out and there's more uncertainty. This is also a season of acute stress where whoever you are, if you're not falling apart a little bit or experiencing some stress or some anxiety, or if things aren't quite falling into place like you had hoped and it's causing you stress, I think that is all of us. And if that's not you, I would love to change places with you, because I think every day I have at least one or two moments where everything kind of falls apart from the way that I thought it might be. And there's a stressor introduced into the environment. And I think you add in some loss there. And I think we could talk a lot about loss in this moment. We could talk about just the collective loss as a world, as a nation, of the people who are fighting this virus, who are succumbing to this virus. I think there's a loss in social distancing. There's a loss in not being able to touch your loved ones and to go out and do the normal things you do and to go to work the way you usually do. There's all kinds of loss. There's a loss of control. There's a feeling of kind of helplessness in this. And so when you put all these things together in the context that we're in, no wonder we feel some anxiety, some tension, some irritability, and some worry. And I don't think I'm alone in those things. And so just with this being the context of where we are, I wanted to kind of take a step back from there and start to kind of maybe look at anxiety as a whole. And I think anxiety, and many of you probably know more than I do about this, or he could share a lot more, but so for those of you, hopefully this is just kind of some information to remind you, but I also think it's helpful for us to just kind of think through this as we're sitting in this this time together. So, anxiety can be something that well, it is something that we all experience. It's a part of normal life. We all experience worry, anxiety, and fear as part of normal human life. And anxiety can actually be good and appropriate. And a couple things ways that this could play out. And anxiety can make us aware that something's not right in our environment, in our life. It can be kind of a signal to let us know that maybe there's an unmet need, or maybe there's a responsibility we're ignoring, or maybe there's something going on that we actually need to pay a little bit of attention to. And so anxiety can kind of show us that and make us aware of that. And then from there, it can mobilize us. We can realize it, and we can sit on it, and we can try to ignore it. And anxiety keeps kind of saying, hey, you need to take care of that. You need to take action on this. And so it can push us to things that we would rather ignore them, but it reminds us, and it brings those things into the front of our minds, and helps us to actually move into action on those things. It's linked to flight, fight, or freeze. So obviously in moments where you need that, that's highly appropriate and good. And each one of us find our own different ways where we fall into that. In this certain context, anxiety might ask us to answer this question: how am I going to juggle all this from home every day? I remember early on, my wife and I, knowing that we were about to be homeschooling, it's like every day we're like, let's make a schedule. And we just didn't know how to do it. So we just kept pushing it off. And then anxiety said, no, you need to answer this. Or it might cause you to look in your closet and go, do we have enough toilet paper? Or invite us to wear a mask. Or it might even push us to make masks for others. We're worried and we want to do something, and we have the ability to do this. And so let's get together and let's actually make something happen. Let's do some good that we can figure out from our own home. When acute stress, so this kind of localized contextual stress and anxiety, moves to more chronic experiences, that's when we need to start kind of paying attention. When normal worry moves into more obsessive worry, and it's usually worry that kind of is future oriented. It's usually things that you really cannot control. And when it gets to a place where these ruminating thoughts just keep coming back, where you find yourself off in the land of the worry-filled future and not really in the present moment, these are things that you'll want to pay attention to, and maybe start to think about, reaching out to either friends or actually getting professional help. And just for context, I did see, I think before this pandemic, I had seen stats anywhere from 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 people will navigate an anxiety disorder in their normal life. And I haven't seen anything coming out of where this pandemic is going to take us in regards to that. But I mean, 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 is already a significant number of the population in the United States. And so to imagine, what coming out of this situation, where that might be. And I did read somewhere that there is a 40% increase in calls to mental health hotlines right now. And one of the interesting things about that was that a majority of those were people under the age of 25 who were needing support, more support than they were able to get in this time. So this is an interesting moment. And for some people, there is the need to reach out for more support, to reach out for things that you just can't shake, where these experiences are leading you to worry and things are out of your control. And I encourage you, if you find yourself in that place, to go ahead and to reach out in that way. For me, and one of the things I think when you think about anxiety, a lot of times we feel this actually in our bodies. And I don't know if you are aware of your own kind of location of anxiety in your body and how you kind of feel it coming on. For me, it's the third one there. It's the tightening body. I feel it in my neck and in my shoulders before I ever even really know that it's there. And that's usually a great cue for me to start paying attention and start kind of going, what's going on, and getting kind of curious. For other people, it might be a spinning mind, where your mind's just constantly going, your thoughts are constantly racing, and you're kind of having a hard time getting control of it, or a racing heart. And for those folks, sometimes maybe the heartbeat's racing and they just need to do some things and get up and do some stuff, and their anxiety is kind of playing out in that way. I know for me, throughout this season, I have been much more hyper aware of the tightening body when stress and anxiety is coming on. And if you can kind of pay attention to that and give yourself permission when you feel that, to just check in a little bit So maybe if you can identify where you experience these things, which one of these three is usually yours, or another way that you might experience this in your body, that physical sensation can sometimes be a really good cue for you to then kind of check in with yourself emotionally or mentally to see what might be going on. And I do also want to point out there is a difference between anxiety and panic, especially in our current context. We just kind of described anxiety, but panic is often a very irrational and catastrophic thinking. You know, the folks who are in the grocery stores in the early weeks hoarding and panic usually leads you to being a little more closed off. Where in the middle of anxiety, you might be feeling stress and those kinds of things, but you can still be open. You can still be generous. The other thing I think about panic is it's highly contagious, as you probably have noticed as well. And so I think you can kind of look around and see that, and also check yourself to where you are. If things open up now and it's good, but then when it comes back in the fall, if it just hits you in a whole new way, these are just maybe some good things to kind of remember and keep in your back pocket and kind of check in with yourself as you navigate through this. I think another interesting thing as we kind of navigate this is, I think if we were to all check in, and I were to ask everyone on this call, you know, are you feeling anxious or stressed kind of in life right now? Imagine all of us would say yes. Imagine we would all say that we're experiencing some kind of stress or anxiety in this situation. Because like we said earlier, when you put prolonged uncertainty, acute stress, and loss all together, that's what you're going to get. But I wonder too, sometimes with anxiety, if there's actually an emotion or a feeling underneath. That if we were actually to get curious for a second with our own selves, if we could identify what we were feeling, underneath there, if we can kind of put words to what that feeling is, then we have an opportunity to go, okay, that's what it is. Now I can kind of handle this. Now I can kind of regulate it. Now I can look into this. And I think some things that might be under anxiety or stress right now in this season for you, that maybe you're not being able to notice, is things like sadness, helplessness, or feeling a loss of power or control. Just being confused. It seems like every day the news is changing and that's confusing. So it's causing a sense of stress, despair. Actually can't see what the next word is there because my screen's covering it. But loneliness, feeling afraid, all these things could be underneath. So if I were to kind of say, yeah, I'm feeling stressed, but actually underneath it, if I really think about it, maybe what I'm actually feeling is anger. Well, if I can kind of identify, okay, I'm feeling anger, then I have the opportunity to go, okay, well, what am I angry about? Is it the Princess Leia wig that just got put on my head? Is it the fact that my kids don't know how to put dirty laundry up in the hamper? Is it the fact that I got another Zoom call coming in, 30 minutes, and I've already been on 5 today, and the last thing I want to do is spend another hour on Zoom? Is it something else that's going on? Now I know it's anger, and I can start to kind of determine where it's coming from. And then once I'm able to do that, I can go, okay, is there anything I can do about this? And if there's something I can do about it, then now I can go, okay, well, it is about the clothes being put up in the laundry basket. Well, I just need to talk to the kids about it. Let's make a plan. Let's work on this. Let's figure it out. And if it's something that I can't control, well, now I have an opportunity to go, okay, well, am I willing to let this go? Am I willing to realize this is out of my control? And I think the other thing in this season, and I wish we were in person because I'd love to kind of be able to get a feel from you guys where you're at. But I think in this season, another thing that might be underneath anxiety or feeling stressed, or feeling worried or even afraid, could actually be grief and loss. There really is a lot in this season that we have to grieve. I think, for me professionally, I know the coworkers that I work with, we're really grieving the loss of summer trips. So much of what we get to do in a yearly ministry with volunteer leaders and other things is often built on this unique experience of getting away for a week with other leaders and doing something significant. And so we've always put so much emphasis and effort into that, and to have that taken away, that's a real feeling of loss professionally. Personally, there's feelings of loss of vacations that are canceled or other things. And so I'd love for you guys, if you can, if you're in seasons where you're feeling some anxiety or just significant amounts of stress, to be able to get a little bit curious and kind of go, what could be underneath this, and start thinking. And if it's some of these emotions, then maybe you can parse them out. And if it's grief or loss that you're really feeling, like, to actually take a moment to grieve, to allow yourself to grieve, like, yeah, this really stinks. Like, I was really looking forward to this, and this is a major loss, and I need to grieve that. Because without that opportunity, it's probably going to keep kind of lingering and staying with you a little bit. So I thought maybe what we could do, this is a practice, but I thought maybe we could actually try it right now. And this is something that I saw earlier in this crisis, and I was like, I think I need this. And so I've been kind of just checking in with myself, but and you can take a moment to actually do this right now. And these may not be the words that you need to think about, but if you were to kind of check in with yourself, maybe when you wake up, maybe in the middle of the day, maybe at night, okay, how am I feeling on anxiety? And like, no, not too anxious, irritability. Actually, yeah, I'm at an 8. Just the other night, my wife asked me, she said, hey, are you upset with me? Did I do something? Like, what's going on? And I said, no, I'm just at an 8 on the irritability scale. Like, I'm just at an 8. It has nothing to do with you. It's just the day, and like, that's where I am. So, and she's like, oh, great, good to know. So instead of her having to guess, instead of me, not knowing to say, I was able to, like, yeah, I just checked in, and actually, like, irritability is pretty high right now. So it's not you, it's me. But fatigue or passivity or anger, but even things like hope and gratefulness, and am I feeling playful at all? Like, kids want to play and hang out. Do I have anything to give? Or am I fearful, or is there joy? And you may have other words that come to the top of your mind, but to take a moment at different times throughout the day and just kind of check in to know where you are. And the big benefit, like I said, is without having known this, I don't know if my wife and I would have gotten an unnecessary argument. She's like, well, you seem mad. And I'm like, well, I'm not. And we went on from there just because of the nature of the situation, or not. But I was able to say, look, no, it's just, I'm irritable. That's, and it's nothing to do with you. So I'm going to give you just a second to just check in, and whatever words come to mind. And if you want to throw them in the chat, if you want to throw in the chat where you are on different scales or the words that you're feeling, feel free to do so. But just take a moment and kind of check in with yourself. Well, as we move into, and hopefully that was a good little practice for you. And like I said, since I've seen it and just kind of had it in my hip pocket every now and then when I'm feeling a little over the top stressed or anything, I'll just kind of simply check in. And it's been incredibly helpful just to identify some of those things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to call this benevolent detachment. And I'll kind of explain why. I think as we're in this context, especially when it relates to anxiety, so much of what anxiety is when you get into that place where it's things that you just can't control, and you're worried about them, you're ruminating on them, you're kind of stuck on those things. And so in this picture over here, it's got some examples of what some of those things could be in this moment. When people aren't following the rules of social distancing, or trying to predict what will happen. And we can get in a place where we're just kind of worrying about these things, that we're spinning, or maybe we're going out and we're just consuming excessive amount of content, reading the news, trying to figure out what might happen, trying to predict it. We just can't stay away. We're just trying to read the next article to understand. And then there are things in our life that are causing us anxiety that we actually can control. And so one of the things that I was thinking about in this season, and one of the things that's become really helpful to me too, is this idea of benevolent detachment, and to release to God the things that we cannot control and to truly detach from them. I want to predict the future. I want to know what's coming down the line. I want to be able to be there, but I ultimately cannot control that. So there's this kind of kind letting go, where I realize that I can't control, and I offer it back to God. And I think God says and invites us to freely give him these things. As 1 Peter 5:7 reminds us, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And so to kind of take a little inventory in your life of some of the things that are inside your control where you can kind of move into them. And then what are those things that are outside your control that are causing you worry or anxiety? And what would it look like for you to actually release those to God? One of the ways I've been doing that is with this idea of taking a pause in the middle of the day, and I have a timer on my phone, and it goes off around 10 and it goes off around 4, and it just invites me to release everything, my family, my people, my parents, anything that I might be worried about, and then any other situation in my life, and just release it to God. And it's just been this great practice, excuse me, of being able to take those things that I can't control and to put them back into the hands of a loving God who's with me, who cares for me, who had this all in his hands. He never actually asked me to carry any of this anyways. He's always been much better at doing that than I can. And so to release those things back to him. And so that's one kind of practice that you guys can do it. And like I said, the thing that's helped me the most is to just put a reminder in my phone that says, what is it I need to let go of? And for it to pop up a couple times a day. And I just, if I catch myself, man, I've been really worried because my parents are both in the medical field, and so is my sister, and they're still going into work, and I've been worried about that. Okay, I release those things to you, God. I put those things in your hands. If it's stuff with my own family here in the deal, I recognize, God, you are with me, and I can release those things to you, and I can go back in with some peace and some joy because they're in the hands of a loving and capable and sovereign God. So cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you, and release those things. This is a great quote that I changed because he had some thou language, but we must empty ourselves of that what fills us so that we may be filled with that what we are empty of. And I just love this idea because I think a lot of us, naturally, we're all walking around kind of with a backpack full of our own worries and anxieties and things that we're carrying around in this life. And in this season, it's really easy to load up that backpack with a lot more stuff, to consume a lot of news, to get worried about a lot of people, and to fill that thing up to where we're actually now empty of this kind of what we just talked about, this space where we're kind of letting go and we're open and we're trusting God. And so sometimes we have to empty those things out so that God can fill us up with more of himself, so that we can feel and experience that divine love and peace, and to jump back in. So hopefully that's a helpful kind of practice as you go from there. Another thing I was thinking about here is you guys know the passage from Romans chapter 8, where it just talks about how the Spirit intercedes on our behalf, with words that aren't even, with groanings and without words. And I heard someone the other day say inarticulate groaning is what the Spirit in the world is doing during this time. And I just thought that was so perfect for my life right now, because when I go to pray, sometimes in this situation, I don't even know what to pray for. And this crisis really is challenging our need for certainty, our need for security, and our need for control. If those are things that you normally kind of are able to bank your life on, if you're able to put your trust in those things, or to kind of seek those things out, they may be a little harder to find in this season, and you may be finding yourself a little off center because of it. And one of the things that anxiety can do, it can actually really be a gift in this season, because it can show us that we actually have put a lot of trust in these things. And we've misplaced our trust in these things, as opposed to putting our trust in a loving God who has all of this in his hands anyways. And so one I want to encourage you, maybe there's a way that you can develop some practices in this time that remind you, like that benevolent detachment, but there may be others, to rest, to trust, and to release your life in this situation to God. And to really trust that the Spirit is actually working on your behalf, that he's praying on your behalf, that you can trust that you really don't have to worry about that's happening behind the scenes, whether you're leaning into it or not. But what might happen if you lean into it a little bit? And what if we could put some of that trust that we had put in certainty, or some of that trust that we had put in security, and some of the places that we found rest because we were able to control the situation, and we actually put those back into God and in our faith. I heard someone the other day say, anxiety can kind of be this gas pedal that causes us to put ourselves into motion, to take action. Well, if God designed us with that, he also designed us with a brake pedal, and that's breathing. And another way to say that might be actually through prayer, the brake pedal of prayer. I think of Philippians, go to God with your anxieties by all things in prayer, take them to him. And I wonder what it would be like for you to maybe sit in this season, to just take a few deep breaths, to realize that you can't control in that moment. You're not able to really produce the things maybe you used to produce. You're not able to kind of do the things you used to do, but you are sitting here and you're breathing, and God is with you, and the Spirit's interceding on your behalf with this inarticulate groaning. And that's maybe all we can muster right now. And to let your heart rate kind of come down, to be reminded of this God who loves you, to kind of put your feet solidly on the floor and just realize that you're grounded in this space, and that there's a God who gives out peace that passes understanding. There's a God who says, my joy is going to be your strength. And we can actually lean into those fruits of the Spirit in this time, like love and joy and peace and patience. God is giving us those gifts. As Emily kind of shared in her sermon this week, that idea of, I've come to give you life and life abundantly, and our emotional and mental and spiritual and social well-being, they're all interconnected. So to just take a moment and to kind of sit there and go, God, I don't know where all my well-being is coming from right now, but I'm trusting the Spirit's interceding on my behalf, and I put myself in front of you. I'll give a few other little practical things here, and then maybe we can open it up for some questions, Stacy. I was thinking about this too. One of the things that might be happening in this time is you might be becoming aware of how you actually deal with anxiety. Maybe you weren't aware of it before, but now you are, because you're seeing it play out. Because we're all going to cope and process with all of this a little bit differently. So especially if you're living with others in your house, it might be good to be aware of how you react to anxiety and stress in your life. Some of us might numb and become more apathetic. Some of us get very logical, and we move towards reason, and everything is kind of in that logical, we're using that part of our brain. Some of us actually move towards our feelings, and we really feel in this time, and everything is kind of in that vein. Other of us try to create order in our outside world. Anybody doing projects or cleaning their closets or doing some of those things? And some of us are doing that not just because we need to get it done, but some of us are doing that because we're actually trying to control the disorder that we're feeling in our interior world. And we're hoping that if we can put a little order in our outside world, it might ease some of that disorder that we're feeling on the inside. Some of us might be actually leaning back towards structure and schedule, especially if you have little kids in the house. That might be a temptation. That is a way that you work out your anxiety. I just need some kind of structure here. And some of us may go into emergency mode. But I think when we're living in a house with other people, we got to make space for ourselves, because you may actually move through all of these things in this season. We've been in this 6 weeks, and you might be able to check like, oh, yep, been there, done that one. You might have coped in a lot of these different ways. And your spouse or your kids or anybody else who might be living with you during this time, you might be able to go, oh, yep, I've seen them do some of these things, or some things that aren't on this list. And what would it look like for us to make space for ourselves to cope in different ways, and for those around us to cope in different ways? My wife and I cope in very different ways, and that can lead to some tension and some conflict, but we've been able to kind of articulate it. And I guess the beautiful thing about that too is I feel like I know a little bit more about how I handle anxiety. And so once I'm out of this pandemic, hopefully I'll be able to recognize it a little more quickly in the normal times, and it will be of benefit to me because of that. And then I'll just give some final thoughts, Stacy, and we'll open it up. You know, I think one of the things you've probably heard everybody saying this, but get outside, get outside, get outside whenever you can. Go get some sunshine, some fresh air. Today, in between a couple different Zoom calls that I had about 3 minutes, and I just went out and I shot the basketball for like 2.5 minutes, and it was the most refreshing thing that I needed. I would love to encourage you to limit your media exposure. News and social media, these things are breeding grounds right now for just anxiety. And for other people's anxiety being put towards you, especially in the social media world. Maybe limit your news intake to 1 or 2 times a day. And, you know, I'm going to check it in the morning. I'm going to check it again in the late afternoon or evening or whatever, to kind of stay informed, because we need to do that, but to just kind of limit it. Practice kindness wherever you can, with yourself, with your neighbors, with the people living with you. Write a letter to someone you haven't written to just because you want to say hello, and you just want to show them some kindness in this season. Another thing, especially as I think about my kids, you know, whenever if they're really starting to melt down, but even my own self, if I'm really honest, is, okay, when's the last time you ate something? Have you had a glass of water in a while? How'd you sleep last night? How much screen time have you had today? Have you actually gotten up and moved in a while, or have you been in that kitchen chair navigating the 6 different roles for the last 5 hours? Maybe you just need to get up and move. And I've found if I can just check some of these vitals, half the time with my kids and or myself, it's like, oh no, like I just need a Cliff Bar and a glass of water and a little space for a second, and I'll be just fine. I'll give you a couple more practices and then we'll wrap it up. Worst case, best case, in between. If you are finding yourself just really ruminating on a lot of things and you can't shake it, I would encourage you to make a list of, okay, what's the worst case scenario in this situation? Then make a list of the best case scenarios. And then, okay, what's an in between? And the hope would be if you're stuck on the worst case, then you can start to see that this thing's a much bigger continuum than just the things that you're thinking about. So that might be a helpful practice. Kind of in line with benevolent detachment is this idea to just make a list of everything you're worried about or anxious about, and then label each one within or beyond your control. This one's within, this one's beyond, this one's within, this one's beyond. And if it's within your control, just make a little action plan. And as your mind knows that you've got an action plan, it'll kind of release some of that stress and anxiety about it. And if it's beyond your control, this is where that benevolent detachment or inarticulate groaning come in. Figure out how you can release that to God, and to release that so that you don't have to carry that with you. And then the daily check-in that we shared a little bit. So hopefully those things are helpful. And I'll let Stacy jump back in here and tell us what we're going to do next.